the most fundamental thing that I believe is happening here with the Web3, with blockchains and crypto, that's unparalleled at this point, is this new generational opportunity that's unveiling before us, that opens up a new type of economy through a new type of technology to people all over the world.
Hundreds of students in my DeFi Academy who are asking me about the price of Bitcoin this week, and I say, who cares what the price of Bitcoin is this week or this month or even this year? This is such a shift of technology. You could even say it's a human paradigm shift, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle at this point. It's going to happen.
If you can create an economic system, a financial system that works at the speed and scale of the internet, at that point you have a sort of financial big bang unlike anything else we've seen previously. Having this new financial system built on natively digital tools that are open and transparent to the entire world, and then accessible to the entire world, will create an opportunity that will not only be huge in scale, but then accessible to anyone equally. It's tremendously important that people take a look at stuff, start to play with them. People should just open their eyes, take a look, and then make their decisions. Simple as that.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Ben Mincu, the technology entrepreneur, investor, and blockchain pioneer. You are the founder and CEO of the Elrond Network, a highly scalable, fast, and secure blockchain platform that is capable of more than 10,000 transactions per second. Over the past 12 months, you've seen a rapid rise in your market cap to just under $5 billion. Elrond's goal is to become the backbone of a permissionless and borderless, globally accessible internet economy. You've also recently launched the Meyer Decentralized Exchange alongside what you have called the largest DeFi incentive program to date, with the aim to accelerate mainstream adoption and onboard the next 1 billion users in the crypto space. You believe that today we sit on the cusp of a new, transparent global financial system that is accessible to everyone, everywhere. Ben, welcome to London Real.
Really great to be here. Super happy to have this conversation.
Me too. I can't wait to get started. Ben, you said something recently on an interview and it put a smile to my face. You called what's happening now the Roaring 20s, all right? And you were the first person that actually I've heard say that. And, I won't lie, I'm 50 years old and this is probably one of the most exciting times of my life. I was in New York City for the dot-com boom and the startup. I was in New York City for the Wall Street of the 90s. I've been to a lot of cool places in my life, but I've never felt so excited about this space. And maybe we start off and talk about what you see here, because it does feel a little like the Roaring 20s. There's this new financial system. You've talked about this new concept of money that's going to change everything. You've also said that this industry is in a super cycle, and we need to be aware of that. Tell me what you see that maybe not a lot of other people see when you look at this industry as a whole.
Sure. So I do think that there are many, many super exciting things that we're looking at. But the most fundamental thing that I believe is happening here with the Web3, with blockchains and crypto, that's unparalleled at this point, and that sort of the population, the people around the world have discovered through trial and error, is this new generational opportunity that's unveiling before us, and that opens up a new type of economy through a new type of technology to people all over the world. So specifically, moving a bit closer, the idea is that if you can create an economic system, a financial system that works at the speed and scale of the internet and is very inexpensive as the internet is right now, and then becomes accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world, at that point you have a sort of financial big bang, unlike anything else we've seen previously. And you could look at this as a similar experiment that we've had with the internet, where we've seen tremendous growth, tremendous opportunity with specifically two things happening there. One was this idea that you needed a browser or an interface through which the people could experiment the internet. And through this browser, we not only started playing with this new technology, but we essentially also created a market, because you needed a lot of users in order to be able to build the new applications, the new businesses, and so forth. And then secondly, fundamental to this entire growth that we've seen throughout the early days of the internet was the transition from dial-up to broadband. So it's nice to have the ideas out there, but until they're only toys, you cannot build world-class businesses on top of them. So this is why we believe that having this new financial system built on natively digital tools that are open and transparent to the entire world, and then accessible to the entire world, will create an opportunity that will not only be huge in scale, but then accessible to anyone equally. You'll not be able to miss this if you have access to the internet and so forth. And this then can go into 1,000 directions as we look at the different applications that we're discussing about. But it's extremely important to note that this will come as a sort of super wave. This is why we're specifically referring to it as a super cycle. It's not about what the market does right now. It's about what we can do with technology and real world adoption. If we can do this, then we're going to live in a different world.
Yeah, I appreciate you explaining that. I've got hundreds of students in my DeFi Academy who are asking me about the price of Bitcoin this week. And I say, who cares what the price of Bitcoin is this week or this month or even this year? This is such a shift of technology. You could even say it's a human paradigm shift, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle at this point. It's going to happen. And when it does happen, like you said, it will be so massive that it will be something that's maybe even hard to fathom. I often say this could be the fastest adoption of technology in human history, maybe of all humankind. We might not see something that's this fast that affects us all, even when we're all on Mars in a couple hundred years, because we'll have already sorted out peer-to-peer financing, right? So I sometimes talk about that. I had Andreas Antonopoulos in my studio some 5-6 years ago, and he said, Brian, your first experience with the internet was sending an email, and that's what you thought the internet was. And I did that when I got to MIT in 1989. I sent an email to my brother at Stanford, and I didn't use the internet for 4 more years because it was boring, right? And then later, I saw the browser, and you've talked about this, when we could see graphics involved, and it was like, oh, wow, the internet's more than an email. And then later, when we saw Web 2.0, the interactivity, we said, oh, it's even more than that. And Andreas always compared these evolutions to maybe the first time you saw Bitcoin, you thought, oh, that's all it was. It was like the email. And then you saw Ethereum, and you're like, oh, maybe that's more like the browser. And now, I'd say today, we're now seeing kind of like you said, this fully interactive, broadband-based financial system where the possibilities, they seem limitless. It's also probably hard to explain that to a babushka on the street there, where you're at in Romania. So how do you end up trying to communicate this to the average person on the streets that still doesn't see the big picture?
Sure. There are maybe 2 points here. One is the fact that this will not happen overnight. So it always happens much faster than we think. But then in retrospect, you always put a lot of effort into things. And it's super fascinating that there are several technologies that are now sort of at an inflection point. And this is why I referred to this period that is ahead of us as the Roaring 20s. Because more than in any other period, if you're looking at the world through this technology lens, like it's literally insane. You have so much opportunity. Of course, with this technology, there's also a lot of challenges. But what I'm saying is that if you start looking at it as this new decade that we're not just looking at as in looking at a TV show, but we're trying to actively get involved, actively create, actively build stuff. That's the thing you want to do. And then secondly, of course, it's extremely important to understand what are the fundamental things that could accelerate this, that could make this technology, this adoption a reality. And in our case, we're specifically looking at two things, just as in the early days of the internet. With Elrond, we're trying to, on the one hand, build this high bandwidth, low latency, transparent financial system, because this realigns everyone. Like once you have transparency, once you have high bandwidth and low latency, then you basically can send money anywhere in the world in an instant to friends through all this cool services and so forth. But transparency, in addition to that, is a fundamental realignment force where you eliminate a lot of friction, right? Because the current economic model is fundamentally misaligned. There are a lot of interests that are not in the benefit of the, let's say, global population. And putting transparency there changes the game completely, because people, when you see them, when everything is transparent, people change the behavior very, very fast. And then the second element that we believe is core and that we cannot move, without which we cannot have this rapid adoption, is the Meyer application, a simple application that, in a similar way that the browser did, simplifies this entire interaction, enables the simple user to send money to his friends, to start experimenting with this new technology, to experiment with DeFi, with NFTs, and then with all the new stuff that is coming out in a super simple manner. If we can have this transition from dial-up to broadband and this browser moment with the Meyer application, then I believe we can do something that would take 10 years in 3 years or less, just because everything else that we're discussing about comes on top of this. There's no way around the having a high bandwidth network, and there's no way around simplicity. If you have this too, then you can become hugely creative. And this is what we're focusing on, not only explaining, but if I take the phone out and allow you to send money to a username, what we call a hero tag in Meyer, at that point, you understand things in a very, very different way, right? I don't need to get philosophical to make you understand this. My parents can understand this. My grandparents can understand this. And our children certainly can understand this faster than almost anyone.
Yeah, it's so important to stick to those fundamentals. And You mentioned transparency. I spent 15 years in the financial industry. That whole industry exists because there isn't transparency. It's an asymmetry of information, as Gary Gensler would say. And again, most of my career was made on making money by holding information. That's what market makers do. That's typically. And so this whole new space of transparency, first of all, it's important for people to understand that's revolutionary for almost any industry, let alone finance. And it really potentially changes the whole game. But if you don't have the speed and the scalability, there's nothing to talk about. And I had the same conversation, Ben, with Emin Gunsir of Avax a couple months ago. And he said, Brian, this is the elephant in the room that no one's talking about, speed. He said, Ethereum's not talking about it. You got the gas fees. You got nobody actually solving this problem. And until you have speed, there's nothing else to talk about because finance doesn't work. Metaverse doesn't work. Are you going to wait to find out if you get to the next level? You don't have to. You don't want to wait. You don't want to pay $100 in gas, right? You need the speed. And so this is what we're waiting for these layer ones to solve. And so I want to jump in and talk about Elrond. And I've obviously heard you talk about this vision of what you guys have, which is amazing. I'm calling right now the layer one wars because that's kind of what we're seeing played out in the top 50 market caps. You guys are in there. But I've also had people like Justin, son of Tron here. I've had Emin and John Wu of Avax. Obviously, we're talking about Solana and DOT. I've had Macaulay here of Algorand. And they all have a layer one solution with a new consensus protocol that's going to be the fastest and the next best thing. And I hope they're all right. And I hope you're right too. What makes yours different? Can they coexist? And maybe you can go a little deeper on Elrond.
Sure. I think a good way of framing things is escaping this sort of zero-sum game. Because if you're focused specifically on the physical economy, current financial system, things are very much zero-sum. You sort of very hardly can make new things without taking a bit from the other ones and so forth. But fundamental to what we consider the most important element at this point is this idea that our discussion, our progress is not looked at in the light of what, let's say, if we're a Bitcoin killer, an Ethereum killer, or some other project killer. Rather, we're super focused on onboarding the next billion people. Why is that? Well, it almost seems like if you were to boil down things to one thing and one thing only, then this entire market lives and dies by the number of people it can onboard. If you're playing with the same people, then of course, the focus will be, how do I kill Bitcoin? How do I steal a few people from Bitcoin, a few people from Ethereum, and so forth? Rather, if you're looking at this from the standpoint of we're more than 8 billion people, and we currently have probably like 200 million people in the space playing with this technology. At that point, it becomes even more obvious how large the opportunity is here. And it becomes even more obvious why this change from dial-up to broadband is necessary, and also why this change from simplicity becomes necessary if you've solved the scalability problem. And so what Elrond has been focusing on is not looking at the technology for technology's sake, but solving the problem as fast and elegant as possible to then move to the next elephant in the room, which will see a discussion around for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, which is always onboarding the users. How can you simplify? Suppose that you've solved scalability and everything has gone to a maximum point. What do you need most? What will be the fundamental limitation toward which you'll look day after day? And we've looked at this for the last year, for the last 2 years, and so forth. And since Meyer has been launched, Meyer is specifically this application that simplifies interaction, that enables anyone to just with a phone to tap into this new opportunity, this new technology, without having to understand all the rocket science that goes behind the scenes. And so zooming out, 1 billion people is the focus that we're looking at. Why 1 billion? Because when we would reach a milestone of 1 billion people, I believe that this virtual economy will very likely become the default economy. At that point, this economy will make the current financial system look like the TV looks right now. I mean, of course, the TV still exists, but when you're on the internet, you see that everything happens a lot faster, a lot more exciting, a lot more interesting. And so 1 billion people is the focus. We welcome all the efforts in the space. I don't think this is a zero-sum game, as I said before. I do think there's a lot of merit to Bitcoin. I do think there's a lot of merit to Ethereum and some of the other technologies. I just think that we're going to see several multi-trillion-dollar networks in the space, and Elrond is extremely well positioned to deliver a product and experience to nations, to institutions, to businesses and users in a way that has not been delivered before. So yeah, anyone who wants to contribute to that vision is super welcome wherever they may come from.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you don't want to try to take users from Bitcoin or Ethereum, and you're looking as in how can we create more customers and create more value. But that being said, you know, it's a kind of obvious question to say, what is different from Elrond than, say, a Tron or an Avax or a Solana? I mean, you guys are part of the conversation now because of your market cap and because of your volume. So, I mean, what does make you different? Because a lot of people are predicting that each one of these chains will find its own niche going forward based on whatever happens, user case, et cetera. But how would you answer that question? How are you guys different?
There are a few things that we look at and we care about a lot. On the technology side, the idea is that what you want is a scalable system that has no limit, that scales with the number of nodes. And Elrond's elegance can be seen in the fact that we can not only scale to 10,000 transactions per second, for instance, but we can scale almost indefinitely with each new shard that we can put within the network. That means we can already scale beyond hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. And this is fundamental if you want to, again, look at this as a global economy. Second, of course, it's transactions and transaction costs. If you look at, as you said, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so forth, there are all these problems that you can clearly see. And the idea is that you cannot have a global financial system when each basically fee, and there were some memes and jokes with for instance, even Ethereum. Bitcoin is even worse in this respect, but Ethereum being adopted at McDonald's, someone buys a burger, the burger costs $5, the fee is $70. You only pay $75 for those fees. Now, going back to the point, having a scalable system that can grow with each new shard is fundamental. That means you can really move to the high bandwidth economy. And then secondly, having this unique focus on user experience, on simplifying things so that more people can participate and interact with this technology is what makes Elrond super different. Just as Bitcoin was to the cyberpunks and Ethereum was to the developers, we believe Elrond will be to the average internet user. Just this new layer that you can instantly participate in, whether you're a creative, a builder, or just an investor, you'll be able to interact with the Meyer application and then find your way in this new system, depending on your interest and so forth.
Yeah, let's talk about user experience because it's something that I don't think enough people are talking about. You know, Vitalik famously put out the trilemma of what? Scalability, security, and decentralization, something that was potentially impossible to do. I've had a few guests on that believe they've already solved it, like the Avax guys and the Tron guys, but user experience was never really brought up many years ago. And yet, when you look at a Solana, you would be hard to argue that the reason they're not so successful is because they have a great user experience. Now, they've been accused of not being centralized, decentralized, and we can talk about that. But you can't argue their UX is so slick that the user doesn't care in the immediate term about the central decentralization, which is interesting because maybe we didn't see this coming a couple of years ago when a lot of the old school purists and the builders like you would have said, look, this is a crucial part of what we're doing here. Talk to me about this user experience. Is it the fourth part of what should be the trilemma? How important is it? And do you think the blockchain space really fully understands that it maybe should not be a number one priority?
The idea, I believe, is that first with the trilemma, it almost seems like this was a definition of a problem that seemed to be the case at a particular time. It was not a fundamental technical limitation, but rather a limitation given that knowledge that Vitalik had at that particular time. But I do believe that we've definitely solved the trilemma in the sense that if you have a different kind of technology, the trilemma doesn't apply in the sense that Vitalik defined it at that point. And I do believe that we're in a different space, right? It's like if you have a hammer and a nail, the solution space is very narrow and limited. You can define any kind of problem as a function of the tools that you have. If you have fundamentally different tools, fundamentally different and better technology, at that point, the solution space is fundamentally different, right? And so Elrond sort of starts with what Vitalik and the Ethereum community wanted to build since 2015 and 16. And it almost seems like state charting and so forth has been always 3 years in the future. Now, this is what we've built. This is what we came up with. It was considered nearly impossible at the point where we presented the idea, but we moved forward and delivered the product. Now, moving to the user experience, I believe that this by far will be the most fundamental thing that will decide who wins and what the adoption rate will be, bar none. Why? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how advanced your technology is if only 5 people have to can understand and relate to it. And if they have to learn rocket science to do so, it may be cool, right? But at the end of the day, you only got 5 people. Now, we have 8 billion people in the world. The question is, what can we do to simplify things to such a degree that anyone, wherever they may be, can, with the simplest effort, tap into this, explore this new space, and then discover where their opportunity lies. So during the next years, I do believe that there will be nothing more valuable and more interesting to the discussions that we'll see beyond the technology part than user experience. And I'm extremely excited and happy that we've discovered this insight a lot faster than the discussion started and before it becoming sort of mainstream in the crypto space.
Yeah, and look, I'd love to go a little bit deeper on user experience because that's such a broad term. But just to finish up kind of with what you said, the world learned from Ethereum. I mean, a lot of Ethereum co-founders left to start their own protocols, Gavin Woods of DOT, obviously Hoskinson of Cardano, because they could see, in a way, Ethereum not solving their own trilemma, right? So they all left to try to provide these proof of stake solutions that it's still not obvious Ethereum will be able to launch. Now, I think, funny enough, sharding is something they're going to introduce for that potential proof of stake, but it's not obvious to me or anyone else that they'll be able to do it in a timely fashion, or even that it's the smartest thing to do. I mean, Justin Sun from Tron was here a couple weeks ago and he said, maybe you should leave it alone. It's proof of work. and it's functional, maybe you should leave the proof of stakes to some other things. Now, that's a controversial statement. How do you think Ethereum should proceed? Just to put this point kind of to bed so we can move on to user experience. Do you think that they should try to push ahead and get this proof of stake out there? Obviously, the gas fees are a massive complaint. The biggest complaint I get from my students in the DeFi Academy are the gas fees. Like you said, the burger's $5, but the gas is 70, and it's very prohibitive. Just thoughts on kind of that Ethereum ecosystem before we move forward.
Maybe they should just buy the Elrond technology. I mean, leaving this aside, I do believe that at this point, like most of the problems, everything they've been trying to do in some sense has been built. It's a lot about execution and not too much about philosophy at this point, right? So we've presented the paper in early 2018. Now a lot of time has passed, and it has been super difficult, super painful to move forward, find the solutions, and build this technology. And at the end of the day, a lot of the discussion, a lot of the, let's say, friction and legacy debt lies precisely in this, that once you have a huge architecture with a lot of interests, trying to change it, even if you would have today the solution, is like driving a car with 200 miles an hour and then trying to change the engine while driving, right? And it will be a huge pain. The simplest way to approach it, or let's say the way to make it less painful, is of course to create incentives. If the miners, if all the other people have incentives to move to this new technology, at that point, at least you will have tailwind, not headwind. At this point, it's like everyone will criticize it, a lot of discussion, there might even be a civil war, sort of. So it's super tricky, but I do believe that there are solutions, and we always welcome discussions with the Ethereum guys. And they should just take a look at Elrond, and maybe we'll have deeper conversations there.
That's a great suggestion. And yeah, they're kind of stuck in a classic innovator's dilemma, strangely, in a space of innovators. And like you said, trying to fix a plane in flight is a near impossible thing to do. Without Ethereum, we'd be nowhere near where we are today, but it's not obvious that they can fix that in flight, or that's the best course. And we'll see what happens over the next 18 months. Clearly, they still dominate the DeFi space, regardless of those gas fees, but it's changing fast. And so, again, I'm calling this the Layer 1 Wars. Maybe it shouldn't be called the Layer 1 Wars. Maybe the Layer 1 Collaboration Year is what we should call 2022. But that's what I'm seeing when I'm talking to people like you here on the show. And it's fascinating to see it all happening so fast. I mean, a year ago, we weren't talking about really any Layer 1 solutions. And now they dominate the top 50 market caps, and they dominate the conversation. And again, the reason I'm in business with my DeFi Academy is two reasons. First of all, user experience, and then lack of understanding. And so let's move into user experience, because what I do is I get people from 17 years old up to 77 years old. And by the way, I've had my daughter in here. She's 17. We talked about crypto. I got her on a MetaMask wallet. My mom, she's 78. She lives in California. She now has a MetaMask wallet. But it wasn't the easiest thing to do, Ben, right? As you know, right? And I had to send them some crypto and send them some stable coin. And now, have they used it? Maybe a little bit. I sent them an NFT, which was a better way to onboard them, and we'll talk about the metaverse going forward. But let's talk about that user experience, because like you said, 8 billion people in the world. I think 3 billion have a smartphone, I think. They obviously can use their smartphone and use the internet. So those two industries have mastered the user experience. Tell me about, what does this look like going forward, and why it's such a priority for you? And what does even that mean, user experience, to an individual?
Sure. So a good way, a productive way of seeing it is, how can you compress all this information in one element, sort of that the user can look at and see or discover the other elements without having to learn a lot, without having prior knowledge of specific things in computer science and so forth. And very specifically, it boils down to a few things in the crypto space. First and foremost is the fact that for as long as you have to type in a string of characters, 30 something characters as an address, that's literally crazy for most people. I mean, we've got used to it just because a lot of people make money, and they, as you said before, even though it might be painful, it's still interesting to look at and so forth. But just consider the bandwidth limitation of the brain when you're trying to ask someone a string of characters and tell them that this is your address. And then consider how simple it becomes when you just give them your username. That alone is something that's of huge importance. And as soon as it becomes a standard, as we've made it in the Meyer application, the Meyer wallet, you basically have this one thing that becomes your hero tag around which you can have whatever addresses you want. Bitcoin addresses, Ethereum addresses, Elrond addresses, and so on. And this is the only thing you really need from the user. This is the thing you can transfer them money through via WhatsApp and so forth, or directly on the internet, because you have their hero tag and you can move forward with that. A second element, of course, is security. How can you create, and here the question is, how can you teach them and create a process that's progressive and gradual without having to ask the same level of security from a guy that basically has zero money in crypto, and then you're asking him to set up a security vault as he would have $1 million. Like, that's crazy in whatever way you're looking at it. But I mean, isn't there a way to make it super subtle, super simple, super playful? Like, ask me something now, then give me some stuff to do, get me excited, and then get me reminded about this second thing that I need to do, and so forth. And all of a sudden, you see that the effort that I need to put into this is not about like creating this bunker of security in order to not lose my money and so forth. And then thirdly, if you have these two elements and have the speed, the inexpensiveness, what are the applications that you need to simplify and boil down? Like, what's DeFi for the average user? DeFi, if you look at it, you need to look at it in a much more broader sense, because the idea here is that you've had fintech and you've had DeFi, and these two things are basically two important points from the same coins. Namely, fintech has always been about front-end improvements in the applications, and DeFi has always been about the back-end improvements in the application. The end user doesn't care about what algorithm, what code you're really using. The end user cares about, how can I use my money? Is it safe? Is it secure enough? Can I participate in this and that? If you can translate this and compress it so that the end user can look at it and say, so a savings account that gives me 20% interest rather than minus 0.5%. How cool is that? I mean, that's super cool. That's something anyone in the world almost could understand. And so most of the things that we're looking at, we've had years to get accommodated to them, to compress information so that they mean something to us. What does a seeds phrase mean to the average user? I mean, this was an insight, a very fundamental insight that we've discovered when we said that most of the people lost their money, super sadly, in the crypto space because a seed phrase or passphrase basically is nowhere different than gibberish to the average user. Like it's something super random, arbitrary. You put a sound at, it doesn't mean anything. And then it's this type of things that are so crucial that you will not survive to cross the chasm unless they are addressed. And we've put a huge amount of effort into addressing them and creating this very simple mobile wallet that's called the Meyer app. And it's out. It has a lot of space to improve further. It's nowhere near to what we wish it to be, and we have a lot of exciting stuff on that. But I mean, we need to do the steps. We cannot wait for the super cycle to just happen, like watching TV and taking some popcorn and so forth. We need to kick in, put the best minds at work, and find the best solutions for the users if we want them to come in.
Yeah, a bunch of important points there. Let me go deeper on a couple. Like you said, that username, I mean, you're talking about this 30-digit alphanumeric. You're basically talking like about a hot wallet address that nobody can really remember and nobody knows what the letters mean. And yet that's what we're expected to use to transfer money. You're going back to more of that, what's your Facebook name, what's your Instagram handle, what's your PayPal address, right? PayPal did it really well. You've got an email address that I can send money to. And we know that that worked. Obviously, they were one of the, I guess, the biggest disruptors in fintech originally. So I see where you're going with that. The security issue, Ben, this is massive. And again, I'm teaching hundreds of students on a regular basis, and I get them to set up hot wallets and cold wallets. And I'm telling you, it's brutal because I guess the way you explained it, the security doesn't scale with your asset size, right? And so it's like when you open up an account at a bank or something, it's like, and first of all, it's all this pain, it's all this paperwork, and whether you have $1 or $1 million, you have to go through a lot of the same security. And one of my guests was recently here, and they described it as like carrying around like a big iron metal safe, and you go to Starbucks and you have to buy a $5 coffee, and you have to, wait a second, you have to go in there and do the combinations and pull out your money and give it to them, and then you have to carry around this huge safe. And it doesn't make sense. I really am expecting some massive security innovation in this space in the next 18 months, from so many levels, to insuring coins, to better wallet access, to, like you said, smarter versions of security that scale with the amount involved, and better things than passphrases. I mean, how much crypto has been lost because people have outsmarted their own security, right? I wrote down the passcode and it's in the sock drawer and it's gone, right? And as opposed to some bad actor stealing it. I mean, I don't know what the rates are, but it's probably higher on user error than it is from a bad actor. So some really good points here. Last thing, gamification. Let's talk about this because, again, I spent 15 years in the banking industry, Ben. You don't play games in the banking industry. There's no fun allowed in the banking industry. There's never a game to get someone involved into account. Never. I mean, maybe these days a high street bank might offer you a perk, but that's it. So talk to me about this concept of gamifying this experience, because this seems like the next level. This seems like what you're talking about and where we need to go with this gamification. Can you talk about this concept?
Sure. So the key point here is that first you need some solution to the key problems that we've mentioned, like simplifying things for the key concepts so that the user understands them, and then delivering them to the user in a way that's compelling, easy to understand, and then gradual, progressive as he moves forward. But then a fundamentally next level approach is trying to make all these things super fun, trying to make them applying an additional layer on top of that.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.